He didn't even bother to close the bedroom door all the way. That was the part that stayed with Isabella Moretti long after everything else. Not the silk sheets tangled around two bodies that weren't supposed to be together. Not the perfume that hit her the moment she stepped off the elevator. Not even the sound of his breathing, slow and satisfied, while she stood in the hallway holding her heels in one hand and 72 hours of exhaustion in the other. What stayed with her was the door, left open just enough. Like he didn't care. Like she didn't matter enough to even warrant the small decency of a closed door. She had saved his empire that week, and he hadn't even shut the door. If you've ever stood in a doorway and watched your entire life rearrange itself in front of you, if you've ever felt the floor tilt under your feet while everything around you stayed perfectly still, then you already know what Isabella felt in that hallway. And if you haven't, stay with me. Because this story is about what happens next. What a woman does when the person who was supposed to protect her becomes the one thing she needs protection from. Don't go anywhere. Subscribe to this channel right now and follow Isabella's story all the way to the end, because I promise you, what she does next will shock you, inspire you, and maybe even change the way you see your own strength. Hit that like button, drop a comment, and tell me what city or country you're watching from. I want to see exactly how far this story travels. Now let's begin. The drive from JFK back to Manhattan took 40 minutes on a good night. This was not a good night. Isabella sat in the back of the car with her eyes closed and her hands folded over the small but unmistakable curve of her stomach, trying to remember the last time she had eaten a real meal. Not an airport sandwich. Not the cold room service pasta she'd pushed around a plate in Geneva at 2 in the morning while reviewing red-lined contract pages. A real meal. Something warm. Something that someone had made with care. She couldn't remember. Her assistant, Marco, had texted 3 times during the flight, updates on the Antwerp shipment, a note about a call with Seoul that needed rescheduling, a reminder that the quarterly governance report was due Thursday. She hadn't answered any of them. She had turned her phone face down on the tray table somewhere over the Atlantic and spent 4 hours pretending she was a person who could sleep on airplanes. She was not a person who could sleep on airplanes. Outside the car window, Manhattan slid by in streaks of yellow and red, the city doing what it always did, burning through the night like it had something to prove. Isabella watched it without really seeing it. Her mind was still in that boardroom in Zurich, still sitting across from Werner Hoffman and his team of lawyers, still hearing the particular silence that fell over a room when a counteroffer lands exactly right. She had landed it. $6 billion in restructured logistics contracts, signed and dated, protecting Moretti Shipping's European corridor for the next decade. She had done that. Her, the pregnant woman they'd all been so carefully not looking at. She almost smiled. Almost. "Mrs. Moretti." The driver's voice was quiet, respectful. "We're here." She opened her eyes. The building rose above her, 42 floors of glass and steel in Tribeca, the kind of address that announced itself before you even walked through the door. She and Damien had chosen this apartment 6 years ago, back when everything between them still felt like something worth celebrating. She remembered standing on the terrace on their first night there, looking out at the city, thinking, "This is what we built. This is real." She picked up her shoes from the seat beside her and got out of the car. The lobby was quiet at this hour. The night concierge, a young man named Felix, looked up when she came through the revolving door and started to say something. His mouth opened. His expression flickered with something she didn't have the energy to read, and then he seemed to think better of it. He smiled instead, the careful smile of a person who knows something they've decided not to say. Isabella didn't notice, or if she did, she filed it away in the part of her brain that was already running on fumes and couldn't afford another input. She took the private elevator to the penthouse. The ride-up was silent except for the faint mechanical hum of the cable and the distant sound of her own heartbeat. She leaned against the mirrored wall and looked at herself, really looked, the way you only do when you're alone and the lighting is unforgiving. She looked tired. Not the pretty tired of magazine covers, not the romantic tired of women in films who fall asleep in cashmere and wake up dewy. She looked like someone who had been running on espresso and determination for 3 days straight, and whose body was starting to send very serious memos about the consequences. There were shadows under her eyes. Her hair had given up somewhere over the Atlantic. She was still wearing the same charcoal blazer she'd put on Tuesday morning in Manhattan, which meant she had now worn this blazer across 6 time zones and 2 continents. She looked, she thought, like exactly what she was. The woman who kept the whole thing running, and nobody's first thought when the lights went on. The elevator doors opened. The hallway outside the penthouse was dim, lit only by the low accent lighting that ran along the baseboards. Damien's preference, something about not disturbing his sleep when he came in late. Isabella stepped out, already unbuttoning her blazer, already thinking about the shower she was going to stand in for approximately the rest of her life. And then she saw the shoes. They were sitting just outside the bedroom door. Placed there, not dropped. Set down carefully, side by side, the way you do when you're trying to be quiet. Black stilettos. Valentino, if she wasn't mistaken, and she was rarely mistaken about things like this. Red soles. Size 7. Isabella wore a size 7.5. She stopped walking. The blazer was still half unbuttoned. One hand rested on the lapel. The other hung at her side, her own heels dangling from 2 fingers. The hallway was quiet. The kind of quiet that isn't empty. The kind of quiet that is full of something, pressing against the walls. She stood there for a moment that lasted much longer than a moment. Then she walked to the bedroom door. It was open. Not wide, just ajar, just enough. Just enough for the light from the city outside to come in through the floor-to-ceiling windows and fall, pale and indifferent, across the king-size bed. Across the California king bed with the Italian linen sheets that Isabella had ordered from a vendor in Milan because Damien had complained about the thread count on the previous set. Across Damien. And the woman beside him. Isabella recognized her immediately, which was almost the worst part. It wasn't a stranger. It wasn't some anonymous face she could bracket off and deal with abstractly. It was Camille Fontaine, 31 years old, Columbia MBA, head of executive development at Moretti Group, and for the past 3 years, Damien's personal assistant. Isabella had interviewed her, had asked the questions, had signed the offer letter. They were asleep. That was the other part. Not caught in the act, already done, already settled, already sleeping the deep and boneless sleep of people who felt completely at home where they were. Damien's arm was around her. His face was turned toward her hair. He looked, in the pale city light, entirely at peace. Isabella stood in the doorway and looked at them for a very long time. She did not make a sound. She did not move. She did not cry. Not yet. Not here. Not now. What she felt was something older and stranger than grief. Something quiet. Something that had maybe been building for a long time and had simply, in this moment, finished building. She looked at her husband sleeping with his assistant in the bed she had picked out, in the apartment she had helped design, in the empire she had spent 12 years helping to hold together. Then she took out her phone. Her hands were completely steady. That surprised her later when she thought about it, that her hands didn't shake. She opened the camera. She recorded what was in front of her, just for a minute, just enough. Then she put the phone back in her pocket. She picked up the Valentino shoes from outside the door. She set them inside the room, neatly, just inside the threshold. She didn't know why. Maybe so there would be no confusion in the morning about where they were. Maybe some other reason she couldn't name yet. Then she walked back down the hallway, took the elevator back down to the lobby, and sat down in one of the chairs by the front window. Felix, the night concierge, looked over at her. She looked back at him. "Is there anything I can get you, Mrs. Moretti?" She thought about it. "Tea," she said. "If you have it." "Of course." He was already moving. "Chamomile?" "We have chamomile." "That's fine." She sat with her hands resting on her stomach and watched the street outside. It was nearly 2 in the morning. The city was still doing its thing. A cab going by, 2 people walking fast, a delivery truck idling at a red light. All of it ordinary. All of it exactly what it was supposed to be. The tea arrived. She held the cup in both hands and let it warm her fingers. She sat there until 4 o'clock in the morning. She did not go back upstairs. She did not call anyone. She did not scroll through her phone or review documents or think about the soul call that needed rescheduling. She just sat and thought. For 12 years, Isabella Conti had built something. Before she was Isabella Moretti, before the ring, before the penthouse, before her name was hyphenated to a dynasty, she was Isabella Conti from a family of modest maritime traders in Genoa. She had grown up around shipping manifests and port schedules, the way other children grew up around kitchen tables and bedtime stories. She understood cargo and weather windows and the particular arithmetic of getting things from one place to another without losing too much along the way. She had come to New York for a graduate program at NYU. She had met Damien Moretti at a maritime law conference at the age of 27, which was not a romantic story by any conventional measure, but it had been their story. He had been 32 and already running a significant piece of his father's operations, and he had been the most confident person she had ever met. Not arrogant, not then, not yet, but certain. Certain in a way that she had found, at 27, genuinely dazzling. He had pursued her. Flowers sent to her office. Dinners at places she had to look up afterward to understand what they cost. He had told her on their third date that he had never met anyone who understood shipping the way she did, and that he meant that as the highest compliment he knew how to give. She had believed him. She had believed all of it. They married 2 years later. His father, Enzo Moretti, a man who had built the company from 3 cargo ships and a prayer, had pulled her aside at the reception and held both her hands in his and said, in the particular way of old men who have seen everything, "You are the serious one. Remember that. When it matters, you will be the serious one." She hadn't understood what he meant at the time. She was 29 and in love and wearing a dress that had taken 4 months to make. She had laughed and kissed his cheek and gone back to the party. She understood now. Because it was Isabella who had spent the following decade quietly, methodically, building the infrastructure that Damien took credit for in every boardroom and at every gala and in every profile in every financial magazine that had ever put his picture on the cover. Damien was the face. He was very good at being the face, charming, magnetic, the kind of man who made other powerful men feel comfortable, which is its own rare skill. She did not take that from him, but the substance was hers. The European corridor restructuring, her idea, her negotiations, her relationships. The Asia-Pacific expansion that had added $4 billion to the company's valuation over 3 years. She had drafted the strategy on a yellow legal pad during a red-eye to Tokyo. The governance framework that kept Moretti Group from being swallowed by 3 separate regulatory investigations over the past 5 years. She had built it piece by piece, brick by brick. Mostly during hours when Damien was at dinners she was too tired to attend. She had also, somewhere in the middle of all of that, gotten pregnant. Not accidentally. They had talked about it. He had said he wanted it. He had been warm about it, actually, warmer than she expected, which had surprised her and moved her in ways she hadn't admitted to anyone. She had thought, for a while, that the baby might be the thing that pulled them back from whatever distance had been slowly growing between them. That had been 9 months ago. She pressed her hand against her stomach in the quiet lobby and felt the small movement beneath it. Her daughter, who she had already decided would be named Elena, after nobody in particular, because she deserved a name that was entirely her own. "I know," she said softly, to no one, to Elena, to herself. "I know." She had been making excuses for the distance for years, telling herself it was stress, it was the business, it was the particular friction that accumulates between 2 people who are both too busy and too proud to sit down and say, "Something is wrong between us." She had seen the signs. She wasn't an unintelligent woman. She was, in fact, an extraordinarily intelligent woman, which is why the self-deception had required such sustained effort. You see what you're willing to see, until you can't anymore. The bedroom door, left open. The shoes placed neatly outside. Not even the courtesy of closure. She drank her chamomile tea and looked at the street and let the last 12 years settle into something new. Not gone, not erased, but reorganized. Reformed into something she could actually see clearly. She thought about what she had built. She thought about what she could take apart. By the time the first gray light of morning began to show above the buildings across the street, Isabella Moretti had made several decisions. They were quiet decisions. Nobody in the building knew she had made them. Damien, asleep upstairs with his executive assistant, certainly did not know. Camille Fontaine did not know. The family council did not know. The board of directors did not know. She knew. She set down her empty teacup. She straightened her blazer. She picked up her phone and opened a contact she hadn't used in 8 months. A number that belonged to a woman named Patricia Osei, who was the most methodical and most private attorney in New York City, and who had, 3 years ago, helped Isabella structure a series of legal agreements that Damien had signed without reading carefully, because Damien rarely read things carefully when they were presented to him as housekeeping. She typed 3 words. "I need you." Then she put the phone in her pocket, smoothed her skirt, and stood up. She would not go back upstairs. Not tonight. Maybe not for a while. She walked to the front desk. Felix was still there, clearly exhausted, clearly pretending not to be watching her the way he'd been watching her all night. "Felix," she said. "Yes, Mrs. Moretti. I need a room, one of the guest suites on 14 if there's one available." He looked at her for a moment. Then he looked at his screen. Then he looked back at her, and something in his face, just briefly, expressed everything he had been carefully not expressing for the past 2 hours. "Of course," he said. "I'll take care of it right now." "Thank you." She paused. "And Felix?" "Yes, ma'am." "Nobody needs to know I came home tonight." He nodded once. The nod of someone who has worked in service long enough to understand what is and isn't his business. "Of course, Mrs. Moretti." She took the key card he handed her. She rode the elevator down to 14. She let herself into a room that smelled of clean linen and nothing else, sat on the edge of the bed, and finally, let herself feel the full weight of everything she had been carrying for the past 72 hours. She did not sob. She did not fall apart. She cried quietly for about 10 minutes with the kind of efficiency she brought to everything. Then she washed her face. She ordered food from the room service menu. She opened her laptop, and she began to work. Not the work Damien knew about, not the shipping contracts, not the governance reports. The other work. The work she had been building, quietly, for years. The kind of work that doesn't look like anything until the moment it becomes absolutely everything. Her phone buzzed on the nightstand. Patricia Osei, calling back already. She picked it up on the second ring. "Are you all right?" Patricia's voice was steady, no preamble, no softening. "Not particularly," Isabella said, "but I will be." "What happened?" Isabella looked out the window at the lightening sky. Somewhere above her, 40 floors up, her husband was sleeping peacefully, unaware that anything had changed. "Everything," she said. "Everything happened, and I think—" She paused. Her voice didn't waver. She had always been the serious one. "I think it's time to talk about the agreements." There was a brief silence on the other end. "I'll be there in an hour," Patricia said. Isabella set the phone down on the nightstand. She sat with her hands on her stomach. She felt Elena move again, a small, determined movement, the kind that reminded Isabella, every time, that there was something growing inside her that had no interest in despair. "All right," she said softly, to both of them, to herself. "All right." Outside the window, Manhattan was beginning to wake up. And so was Isabella Moretti. Patricia Osei arrived at 5:47 in the morning wearing a gray wool coat and carrying a leather briefcase that had seen better decades and didn't care. She was 53 years old, small and precise, with close-cropped natural hair going silver at the temples, and eyes that processed information the way a scanner processes documents, completely, immediately, without sentiment. She knocked twice on the door of Suite 1408 and waited with her hands at her sides. Isabella opened the door. She had changed out of the blazer. She was wearing a hotel robe and had her hair pulled back, and she looked, Patricia thought, like someone who had cried exactly as much as was necessary and then stopped. There was something in her face that Patricia had seen before in certain clients, not the ones who were falling apart, but the ones who had fallen apart and quietly reassembled themselves into something harder than what they'd been before. "Come in," Isabella said. Patricia came in. She set her briefcase on the desk, clicked it open, and looked around the room, the half-eaten room service plate, the open laptop, the teacup with the string still hanging over the rim. She noted all of it without commenting on any of it. "Tell me what happened," she said. Isabella told her, flatly, sequentially, without embellishment. The drive from the airport, the lobby, the shoes outside the door left open. She told it the way she would present evidence to a board. "Here are the facts. Here's what I observed. Here's what I recorded." She pulled out her phone and played the video without preamble, holding it so Patricia could see the screen. Patricia watched it. Her face didn't change. "How far along are you?" she said when it was done. 23 weeks. Patricia nodded once. She sat down in the chair across from the desk. "Walk me through which agreements you want to activate first." That was why Isabella had called her. Not for comfort, not for outrage on her behalf. For exactly this, someone who would skip straight to the machinery. They talked for 2 hours. By the time the conversation was done, the sun was fully up, and Isabella had eaten the rest of the cold food on the room service plate without noticing she was doing it. Patricia had 3 legal pads of notes and a timeline sketched on the back of an envelope. This needs to be invisible for at least 10 days, Isabella said. Nothing that looks like a move. Everything that looks like normal operations. I know how to do this, Patricia said, not unkindly. I know you do. I'm saying it anyway. Patricia almost smiled. When are you planning to go back upstairs? Isabella considered. This morning, before he's up. I'll change, I'll go to the office. He won't know I was ever gone. And if he asks where you've been? He won't ask. She said it without bitterness, which was somehow worse than if she'd said it with any. Patricia snapped her briefcase shut. She stood, buttoned her coat, and paused at the door. Isabella. Yes. You understand that once we start pulling on these threads, there's no... I know what I'm doing, Patricia. Patricia looked at her for a moment, then she nodded. I'll be in touch by noon. She left. Isabella sat alone in the room for exactly 4 minutes. She counted them. Then she got up, washed her face again, put her blazer back on over the hotel robe for approximately 30 seconds before deciding that was insane, changed back into her own clothes, smoothed everything down, and took the elevator up to the penthouse. The apartment was quiet when she came in. The morning light was doing what it always did up here, filling the space with that particular clarity that made everything look chosen and deliberate, all clean lines and expensive surfaces. She had always liked the apartment in the morning. She moved through the kitchen, set her bag down, made herself a coffee at the machine she had picked out 2 years ago after reading more reviews than was rational. She heard him before she saw him. Damien came out of the bedroom at 7:15, barefoot, in the white shirt he'd apparently slept in, his hair the way it got when he'd slept on it wet. He was looking down at his phone. He didn't look up immediately when he came into the kitchen. You're back, he said. Last night, she said. Late. You were already asleep. He looked up then. His eyes moved over her, the blazer, the bag on the counter, the coffee cup in her hand. Something passed through his expression, quick and indecipherable, gone before she could name it. How was Zurich? He said. Done, she said. Signed. All of it? All of it. He nodded. He went to the coffee machine. He stood next to her while it ran and looked out the window at the city below. He smelled like soap. He had showered, she noticed, already showered, which meant he'd been up for a while before he came out. You should have woken me up, he said. You needed sleep. You've been gone for 3 days. I know how long I've been gone, Damien. He looked at her sideways. Something in her tone had been slightly off, and they both knew it. She watched him calculate whether to pursue it, whether to let it go, and watched him decide, as he almost always did, that the easier path was the one without friction. There's a council call at 9, he said. Did Marco tell you? He texted. You should be on it. The Antwerp situation. I'll be on it. He took his coffee and went back toward the bedroom. At the doorway, he stopped. Isabella. She was looking out the window. I'm glad you're home. She waited 2 full seconds before she turned around. When she did, she gave him the same smile she used in meetings when someone said something she was choosing not to respond to directly. Get dressed, she said. You'll be late. He went. She stood at the window and drank her coffee and listened to the sounds of him moving through the bedroom, drawers, the closet, the particular sound of his belt buckle. She had listened to those sounds for 12 years. She could construct his entire morning routine from audio alone, had always found something comfortable in that, in the knowable rhythm of another person's habits. Now she just listened and thought about Patricia's timeline. 10 days. Maybe 12. She could do 12 days standing on her head. The council call at 9 was routine, except that it wasn't. Isabella sat at the small desk in the study while Damien took it from the living room, and she listened through the half-open door to the way he fielded questions from the 7 family council members on the line. He was good at it, smooth, authoritative, projecting the kind of calm confidence that made people feel that everything was under control. She had always admired that about him, even when it frustrated her. What she was listening for now was different. She was listening for where the gaps were. She heard them. The vague non-answer when Marcus Moretti, Damien's cousin and the council's financial oversight chair, asked about the Q3 consulting contracts. The smooth pivot away from a direct question about the Fontaine advisory retainer. The almost imperceptible pause before Damien said the words, fully compliant with board directives. She wrote 3 things down on the pad in front of her. Then she turned back to her own screen and got to work. By 10:30, she had sent 6 emails. None of them looked like what they were. One was to the head of Moretti Group's banking consortium in Frankfurt, checking on the status of a financing extension she had, in fact, already confirmed last week, but was now asking to verify again through a slightly different channel. One was to the company's primary port liaison in Antwerp, a woman named Lieselotte Brams, who had been Moretti Group's most reliable operational contact for 9 years, and who, Isabella knew, would call her personally with any anomalies rather than going through official channels. The other 4 were to people nobody in the Moretti family had ever heard of. At 11, she took a call from Patricia. "I've reviewed the governance agreements," Patricia said without greeting. "The board chair authority structure is exactly what you told me it was. The question is the triggering mechanism." "Material breach," Isabella said. Section 14, paragraph C. "You'd need documented evidence of financial irregularity at the executive level." "I'm working on that." A pause. "How much do you have already?" "Not enough to move. Enough to know there's more." Another pause, longer. "Isabella, when you say you've been building safeguards for years, I mean exactly what I said. How many people know about these agreements? You, me, and Enzo Moretti, who died 14 months ago." Silence. "All right," Patricia said finally. "I'll start preparing the Section 14 documentation framework, but I need you to understand, the moment we file anything, the window for quiet resolution closes permanently." "I don't want quiet resolution." The words came out leveled and clear, without heat, which made them more final than if she'd shouted them. "No," Patricia said. "I can see that. I'll call you at 4. Isabella hung up. She sat for a moment with her hand still on the phone. From the living room, she could hear Damien on another call, his voice low and quick, a different register than the council call. She recognized the register. It was the voice he used when he was being someone other than the executive chairman. She did not get up. She did not go to the door. She wrote one more thing on her pad and circled it twice. Fontaine Advisory. When was it created? Who filed the registration? That afternoon, Damien left for a dinner she had not been told about. He mentioned it casually, in the way that people mention things they want to appear casual about. He was in the doorway of the study, jacket on, checking his phone. "I've got a thing tonight," he said. "Industry dinner, probably late." She looked up from her screen. "Which association?" He didn't even blink. "Maritime Commerce Council. The annual thing." She nodded slowly. The Maritime Commerce Council's annual dinner had been in April. It was October. She had attended it herself, in April, in his place because he had been in Dubai. "Okay," she said. He left. She waited until she heard the elevator close. Then she picked up her phone and called Marco. "Mrs. Moretti." "Marco, I need you to pull the registration documents for an entity called Fontaine Advisory LLC. I need the filing date, the registered agent, and the principal officers. Quietly. Don't run it through the usual research team." A beat. Marco had been her assistant for 4 years. He knew better than to ask why. "By when?" "Tonight." "I'll call you in 2 hours." She hung up. She went to the kitchen and stood at the counter and ate a banana because her doctor had told her to eat more potassium, and her body was the one thing she could still control right now through the simple application of reasonable choices. The view out the kitchen window was still Manhattan, still the same city, still burning through the evening like it had something to prove. She finished the banana. She thought about Elena, about the fact that her daughter had no idea any of this was happening, that she was in there, warm and unhurried, completely uninvested in the adult catastrophe unfolding around her. There was something clarifying about that, something that kept pulling Isabella back to the essential point underneath all the legal strategy and the carefully worded emails. She was going to be someone's mother. She was going to be the woman that someone grew up watching. And she was going to make absolutely sure that what that child grew up watching was not a woman who absorbed damage quietly and called it dignity. Marco called back in 90 minutes. His voice, when she picked up, had a quality she had not heard from him before. A careful flatness that meant he had found something and was deciding how to say it. "Fontaine Advisory LLC," he said, "filed 14 months ago. Registered agent is a firm called ClearPath Corporate Services in Delaware. Principal officer." He stopped. "Marco." "Camille Fontaine," he said. and the secondary listed officer is her brother, a man named Henri Fontaine. Isabella set down the glass of water she'd been holding. And who does Fontaine Advisory have contracts with? The pause was very short, but she felt every millisecond of it. Moretti Group, Marco said. 4 consulting contracts over the past 14 months. Total value. Another stop, longer this time. $41 million. The kitchen was very quiet. Send me everything, Isabella said. Original documents, dates, signatories, wire transfer records if you can get them. Send them to my personal server, not the company one. Encrypt it. Isabella. He almost never used her first name. Are you? I'm fine. Send it tonight. She hung up and stood in the kitchen for a long moment. $41 million. 14 months. And Damien had signed every quarterly report in that period, had stood in front of the family council and the board, and affirmed that all consulting relationships were at arm's length and fully vetted. She picked up her phone again. Not to call Patricia this time. She opened her email and composed a message to Marcus Moretti. Not about any of this. Not yet. Just a note about Thursday's governance meeting, asking to add 20 minutes for an additional agenda item she was still finalizing. Routine, ordinary, the kind of message she sent twice a week. She hit send. Then she went to bed. Alone, in the guest room, with the door closed and the city outside, and her hands resting on her stomach in the dark. She didn't sleep immediately. She lay there and listened to the building around her, the distant sounds of the city, the hum of the elevator shaft, the particular silence of a large apartment that was empty except for her. She thought about Enzo Moretti. He had died 14 months ago, quietly, in the hospital, with Damien at his bedside. She had not been there. She had been in Seoul, closing the Asia-Pacific deal. She had felt guilty about that for a long time afterward, had wondered if he had known she wasn't coming. 14 months ago. The same month Fontaine Advisory was registered. She lay in the dark and put those 2 facts next to each other and looked at them. Enzo had known. She had believed that from the beginning, had believed it when he held her hands at the wedding and said what he said about the serious one. He had built the infrastructure around his son's limitations, and he had done it by building it around Isabella. The governance agreements, the authority structures, the layered oversight mechanisms that Damien had signed off on over the years without understanding what they actually said. Enzo had known about Damien, had known what his son was, and had spent 20 years quietly, carefully, making sure that when the moment came, when the charm failed and the judgment faltered and the man's appetites outran his discipline, there would be something in place to catch the empire before it fell. He had put that something in place through Isabella, not Damien. Her. She closed her eyes. Somewhere in the building, the elevator hummed. She heard it, the rise of it, the stop, the distant sound of the penthouse doors. Damien was home. She heard him moving through the apartment, heard the kitchen, the water running, heard him come down the hallway toward the guest room, pause outside the door, and then continue past. Heard the master bedroom door close. She lay still. She breathed. In and out, measured and quiet. The way she had taught herself to breathe during the worst of the Geneva negotiations, when the room was hostile and the stakes were impossible, and everything depended on appearing completely calm. She was completely calm. In the morning, when Marco's files arrived on her personal server, she would have 41 million reasons to no longer be calm. But right now, in the dark, she allowed herself exactly this: stillness. The last stillness. Because she could feel, the way you feel a change in weather before the temperature actually shifts, that whatever was coming was going to require everything she had. Every resource, every relationship, every document she had ever filed, and every safeguard she had ever built. She was ready. Not in the way that people say they're ready when what they mean is willing. Ready in the practical sense, prepared, positioned, with the architecture already in place. Enzo had helped her build it. She had built the rest herself. And Damien, in his elegant, careless confidence, had never looked closely enough to see any of it. She thought about the shoes, left outside the door, placed there by someone who didn't expect to be caught because they had never been taught to expect consequences. That was about to change. The files landed at 6:43 in the morning. She was already awake, had been awake since 5, lying in the dark with her eyes open and her mind running through the sequence of what came next. When her phone lit up with Marco's alert, she sat up, pulled her laptop from the nightstand, and opened the encrypted folder. $41 million told a story when you knew how to read it. It took her 2 hours. She read every contract, every invoice, every wire transfer record Marco had managed to pull. She cross-referenced dates. She mapped the signatories. She built, in a clean spreadsheet she titled Q3 Operations Audit, a picture that was clear and complete and utterly damning. The consulting contracts were fraudulent, not sloppy. Someone had been careful. The invoices described real categories of work: strategic advisory, market analysis, executive development consulting. The deliverables listed were plausible. If you were looking at any one of them in isolation, you might not catch it. But when you looked at all four together and cross-referenced them against the actual work product that Moretti Group had received in the same periods, the gaps became visible. Work billed for that didn't exist. Analysis paid for that had been produced internally by Isabella's own team months earlier. 2 of the contracts had been approved during quarters when the executive committee's formal approval threshold should have required full board sign-off that had quietly not happened. The money had gone to Fontaine Advisory. From Fontaine Advisory, based on the corporate structure Marco had mapped, it had filtered through 2 subsidiary entities before disappearing into what looked, from the outside, like a real estate holding company registered in the Cayman Islands. She sat back in her chair and looked at what she had built on the screen. This was not a man who had made a foolish mistake with an employee. This was a man who had allowed, or actively enabled, the systematic theft of $41 million from his own family's company, through a company bearing the last name of the woman he was sleeping with. During the year his father had died and left the governance of the empire in the hands of the people Enzo had chosen. The people Enzo had chosen. She picked up her phone and called Patricia. "I have what we need for Section 14, she said when Patricia answered. A silence. Then, "How much?" 41 million, 14 months, 4 contracts, full documentation. The silence was longer this time. "Isabella," Patricia said, "this isn't just a divorce anymore." "I know. If we file this through the governance mechanism, it triggers mandatory reporting to the family council and potentially, depending on the amounts, federal disclosure requirements." "I know. This becomes a criminal matter." "I know, Patricia." Her voice was steady. "I know exactly what this is. I've known for 2 hours. Are you going to help me or not?" Another silence. Shorter. "I'm going to need 3 days to prepare the formal documentation," Patricia said. "Can you hold for 3 days?" "I can hold." She looked at the spreadsheet on her screen. "But Patricia, I need one more thing before we file. I need to know if Damien knew, if he signed off on this knowing what it was, or if he was negligent versus complicit." "Yes. That changes the exposure significantly." "I know that too." "Okay," Patricia exhaled slowly. 3 days. Keep everything on your personal server. Don't discuss this with anyone at the company, not even Marco, not beyond what he's already done." "Understood." "And Isabella?" "Yes." "Go eat something real. You sound like you haven't eaten since Tuesday." She almost laughed. "Almost. I had a banana." "That's not real." She hung up. She sat for another minute looking at the spreadsheet, at the clean, terrible clarity of what $41 million looked like when you broke it down into its component parts. Then she closed the laptop, got up, went to the kitchen, and made herself eggs. She was standing at the stove when Damien came in. He stopped in the kitchen doorway and looked at her. She was in the robe, eggs in the pan, coffee already made. A domestic picture so ordinary that she felt the absurdity of it, like a physical sensation in her chest. "You didn't sleep in the room," he said. "I didn't want to wake you," she said. "I was up early." He came to the counter. He poured himself coffee. He stood 2 feet from her and drank it and looked at the eggs. "You're making actual breakfast," he said. There was something in his voice, not suspicion exactly, more like noticing something unusual in the landscape. "The doctor said protein," she said. He nodded. He drank his coffee. He looked at her again, and she met his eyes this time, held them, gave him nothing to read. "I've got a board subcommittee meeting at noon," he said. "I'll be in the office by 9, she said. "Isabella?" He stopped. She waited, spatula in hand. "Nothing," he said. "Never mind." He took his coffee and left the kitchen. She turned back to the eggs. Her hand was absolutely steady on the spatula. 3 days. She could do 3 days. Outside, Manhattan was already roaring into another morning, indifferent and relentless, the way cities are, moving through time without care for any individual story unfolding inside it. But Isabella Moretti was no longer just inside the story. She was the one writing. She was the one writing the ending now. That was what she told herself on day 1 of the 3 days. And on day 2, she almost believed it. Day 2 was a Tuesday. She spent the morning at the Moretti Group offices on Park Avenue, sitting in her glass-walled corner office, reviewing the Antwerp logistics reports that had been piling up since Zurich, taking calls from Seoul and Hamburg, responding to the 47 emails that had accumulated while she was dismantling her marriage in a hotel suite 14 floors below her own bedroom. She did all of it with the seamless efficiency that her team had come to treat as a baseline, as though competence at this scale was simply her natural resting state and not the product of 12 years of grinding, relentless, largely uncredited work. At 2 in the afternoon, Marcus Moretti stopped by her office. Marcus was 51, heavy-set, with his father's dark eyes, and none of his Uncle Enzo's patience. He ran the family council's financial oversight committee with the particular energy of a man who had been told his whole life that he was almost as smart as the people around him and had decided to compensate through sheer persistence. Isabella had always found him manageable. Not warm, manageable. He knocked on the open door frame and came in without waiting for an answer, which was a habit she had never corrected because correcting it would have required a conversation she didn't want to have. "Thursday's agenda item," he said, dropping into the chair across from her desk without being invited. "What is it?" "Still finalizing," she said, not looking up from her screen. "It's not the Antwerp situation?" "No." "The Seoul expansion?" "No, Marcus." He was quiet for a moment, which was unusual. She looked up. I was watching her with an expression she hadn't seen from him before. Not the usual slightly aggrieved watchfulness, but something sharper, something that had a direction to it. "Is everything all right with you?" he said. The question landed oddly. She held his gaze. "Why do you ask?" He shrugged one shoulder, too casual, the kind of casual that's performed. "You've been in the office 2 days straight. Damien mentioned you came back from Zurich and went straight back to work." "I always go straight back to work." "You're 23 weeks pregnant, Isabella." "I'm aware of that." He looked at her for another moment. Then he stood up, buttoned his jacket, and said, "Whatever Thursday's item is, run it by me before the meeting." It wasn't a request. She recognized that. She also recognized that Marcus had never in 12 years asked to preview her agenda items before a council meeting. "Of course," she said. He left. She watched him go, then turned back to her screen. She sat very still for approximately 30 seconds. Then she picked up her phone and texted Patricia. "Someone is watching. Accelerate if possible." Patricia's response came in under 2 minutes. "Can you do tomorrow instead of Thursday?" She looked at what was on her calendar for Wednesday. 3 calls, a site meeting for the Antwerp review, lunch with the company's head of compliance that she had scheduled 2 weeks ago for reasons that had nothing to do with any of this, but now felt almost comically relevant. "Yes," she typed back. "Wednesday, evening. I'll arrange the venue. Neutral ground. Not the office, not the apartment. Agreed." She put the phone face down on her desk. She breathed. She looked out through the glass walls of her office at the open floor beyond. Her team, 12 people who did not know that the ground under the company they worked for was about to shift. Marco was at his desk, his back to her, his posture doing the thing it did when he was trying to look like he wasn't paying attention, while paying very close attention. She buzzed him. He appeared in the doorway in 4 seconds. "Mrs. Moretti?" "Close the door." He closed it. He sat down across from her desk in the same chair Marcus had just vacated and looked at her with the direct, undramatic attention that had made her hire him 4 years ago. "Is there more?" she said. He knew exactly what she was asking. "There might be," he said carefully. "I've been looking at the subsidiary structure around the Cayman entity. There's a 3rd tier that I couldn't fully map yesterday. Can you map it today? If you give me 4 hours and access to the European filing databases." "You have both. Use the personal credentials I gave you last year, not the company ones." He nodded, started to stand. "Marco." He stopped. "When you have it, call me directly. Not email. Not text. Call." He looked at her steadily. "Is this going to be bad?" She thought about $41 million and a third tier she couldn't see yet. She thought about Marcus stopping by her office to ask questions he'd never asked before. She thought about Damien in the kitchen that morning, saying nothing, never mind, and the particular quality of the nothing of someone who had just decided not to say what they were actually thinking. Probably, she said. He nodded once, like that settled something, and left. She turned back to her screen. She pulled up the governance agreements that Enzo had structured through Patricia's firm, the ones she'd spent the last 2 days quietly reviewing in the margins of everything else. She knew them by heart at this point, had known them for years, but she read them again the way you reread a map before going somewhere unfamiliar, just to make sure you haven't misremembered a turn. Section 14, paragraph C. Material financial misconduct at the executive chairman level, documented and certified by the governance committee chair, triggered automatic review authority in the full family council, bypassing the executive committee. The governance committee chair was a woman named Sylvia Park, a former federal judge and the only fully independent member of Moretti Group's governance structure, appointed by Enzo 6 years ago over Damien's objection. Isabella had lunch with Sylvia Park once a month, had been doing it for 5 years. She was going to need Sylvia in that room on Wednesday night. She picked up the phone. Sylvia answered on the second ring. Isabella, I was wondering when you'd call. Something in that sentence made Isabella go very still. Sylvia, she said carefully. What do you mean? A pause. Not long, a breath's worth. I mean, I've been expecting to hear from you since the Q3 reports. Some of the consulting numbers looked irregular. Relief moved through Isabella like a current. So Sylvia had seen it too, or part of it. I need to meet with you, Isabella said. Tomorrow evening, off-site. I'm available. I'll send you the location. Sylvia, she hesitated. Don't discuss this with anyone before we meet. A short silence. How serious is this? Isabella thought about the third tier Marco was currently trying to map. I don't know yet, she said, but I think it might be very serious. She hung up. She sat for a moment with her hand resting on the phone and her eyes on the middle distance. Through the glass wall, she could see the floor-to-ceiling windows at the far end of the open office, and through those the city, gray and enormous and completely indifferent, as always. She thought suddenly about Camille Fontaine. She had not thought about her directly since the morning she recorded the video, had deliberately not thought about her, had kept her filed in the category of fact rather than feeling, because feeling it would cost her something she couldn't afford to spend right now. But she thought about her now. Thought about what it meant to be a woman who had taken what she had taken, used what she had used, built what she had built on the back of another woman's work. $41 million. Her brother Henri as the secondary officer. 14 months. The same month, Enzo Moretti died, and the hands that had always protected the architecture were suddenly gone. She thought about timing, about how quickly Fontaine Advisory had been registered after Enzo's death, about how much you would need to know about the company's internal governance structure to know exactly which approval thresholds to stay under, which oversight mechanisms were weakest, which quarters had the least forensic scrutiny. You would need to know the inside of the company very well to know all of that. You would need to be very close to the executive chairman. Or, she thought slowly, you would need to be close to more than one person at the top. She picked up her phone again, called Patricia. I need you to do something additional before tomorrow, she said when Patricia answered. What? The Fontaine Advisory registration. I need you to pull the legal counsel who filed it. Already have it, firm called Harmon Associates. Small boutique, mostly corporate formation work. Who at Harmon? A junior partner named, paper shuffling, Reed Carver. Reed Carver. She repeated it slowly. The name meant nothing to her yet. Who does Harmon Associates do regular work for? A pause. More papers. Primarily financial services and private equity clients. A few family offices. A beat. Isabella. One of their listed long-term clients is Moretti Group. The room was very quiet. Which division? Isabella said. It just says Moretti Group, General Corporate. I'd need to dig further to find the specific engagement partner. Dig further, Isabella said. Tonight. I need it before tomorrow. She hung up. Marco called at 6:47. She was still at her desk. The office had mostly emptied out, just the cleaning crew moving quietly through the outer floor and the low hum of the city coming through the glass. "I found the third tier," he said. His voice had a quality that she had last heard from him when he'd told her, 2 years ago, that a key cargo contract in Singapore had been breached in ways that would cost the company $30 million. The quality of someone who has found something they wish they hadn't found. "Tell me," she said. "The Cayman entity, Clearwater Holdings, it has a sister company, registered in Luxembourg, called Tesano Capital Partners." He paused. "Tesano Capital Partners has one listed beneficial owner." "Who?" Another pause, shorter but heavier. "Marcus Moretti," Marco said. She didn't move. She sat absolutely still in her chair, her hand flat on the desk, the phone against her ear, and let that information arrange itself into everything it changed. Marcus. Marcus, who had walked into her office that afternoon and asked what Thursday's agenda item was. Marcus, who had asked her to run it by him first. Marcus, who had been sitting on the Family Council's Financial Oversight Committee for the past 4 years, which meant he had been the person responsible for reviewing the very consulting contracts he was apparently benefiting from. The oversight was the fraud. He hadn't missed it. He had been running it. "Marco," she said, her voice came out completely level. "How much has gone through Tesano Capital?" "I can see 2 tranches so far. 11 million and 9 million. Could be more. 20 million. On top of the 41 going to Fontaine Advisory." She did the arithmetic in seconds, without a calculator, because she had always been able to do that. $61 million. Minimum. "Send me everything," she said. "Same protocol as before." "Isabella." He used her name again. She was starting to understand that this was his tell, that Marco used her first name only when he thought she needed to hear it from a human being rather than from the situation. "What are you going to do?" "Win," she said. She hung up. She sat for 60 seconds, not moving, not doing anything, just sitting with the full weight of what she now knew. Then she stood up, put on her coat, picked up her bag, and walked out of the office. She didn't go home. She walked. It was October in Manhattan, and the air was cold and sharp, the kind that gets into your coat immediately. And she walked for 20 minutes through Midtown without a destination, moving through the evening foot traffic of people who were going places she wasn't going. She needed the air. She needed the physical movement. She needed to think without walls around her. Marcus had been in that office asking her what she knew, which meant he suspected that she knew something, which meant that somewhere, somehow, she had made a mistake in how quietly she'd been moving. Or someone else had made a mistake. And this was the thought that made her stop walking on the corner of 53rd and Lexington, standing in the cold while people moved around her. Marcus had a source inside her operation. She stood on the corner and thought about who had access to what she was doing. Patricia. Marco. Sylvia, now, though only barely. Nobody else. She trusted Patricia with her life. She trusted Marco almost as much. Sylvia she trusted in the formal sense, professional integrity, established track record, no obvious connection to Marcus. But Sylvia had said, on the phone today, "I was wondering when you'd call." And Sylvia had mentioned the Q3 reports unprompted. How did Sylvia know what Isabella was looking at? She stood on the corner in the cold and let that question sit in her chest like a stone. Then she took out her phone and called Patricia. "Change of plans," she said when Patricia answered. "Tomorrow night. I need you to pull Sylvia Park's connection to Marcus Moretti. Any connection. Professional, personal, financial, anything." A very long silence. "Isabella, Sylvia Park is the governance committee chair. If you're suggesting I'm not suggesting anything yet. I'm asking you to find out. If she's compromised, then everything I've been planning is already blown. I know. Find out." She hung up. She stood on the corner a moment longer, in the cold, breathing the October air, and thought about the shape of what she was now looking at. It wasn't just Damien and Camille. It wasn't just 41 million in fraudulent consulting fees. It was a coordinated arrangement involving at least 3 people, Camille Fontaine, her brother Henri, and Marcus Moretti, operating through layered shell companies over 14 months, exploiting the weaknesses in the governance framework that Isabella had spent years trying to get Damien to fix. And if Sylvia Park was in it, if the governance committee chair herself was part of it, then the mechanism Isabella had been planning to use to expose it was already in their hands. She needed to know tonight, not tomorrow. Tonight. She turned around and walked back toward the office. She got back to the building at 7:58. The lobby was quiet. The elevators were empty. She took one up to the 32nd floor, not her floor, but the executive records floor, where the company's formal document archives were maintained by a team that worked days only and went home at 6. She had keycard access to every floor, had always had it, had never needed to use it at 8 o'clock at night. She needed it now. She let herself in. The floor was dark except for the emergency lighting along the baseboards and the ambient glow from the city coming through the windows. She knew the layout had been here dozens of times in daylight. She moved to the records room at the far end of the floor, swiped her card, and went in. The governance committee's formal records were in a locked filing section that required a secondary authorization code. She had that code too. Enzo had given it to her 5 years ago, the same afternoon he'd given her the Section 14 authority structure. The same afternoon he'd sat across from her in the Moretti Group boardroom and said, "There will be a day when you need to see things that people don't want you to see. I want you to be able to see them." She entered the code. The cabinet unlocked. She started with the governance committee meeting minutes from the past 14 months. She worked methodically, pulling files, scanning documents, looking for anything that was off, any approval that had bypassed normal procedure, any motion that had been ratified without full committee presence, any signature that shouldn't be there. She found it in the minutes from 8 months ago. A special governance committee meeting convened on a Friday afternoon, attended by 3 of the 5 committee members. Sylvia Park, chair. 2 others, both long-standing council loyalists, both appointed in the previous administration. The agenda listed a single item: approval of an enhanced consulting framework for strategic advisory services at the executive level. The minutes recorded unanimous approval. The enhanced consulting framework, as described in the attached documentation, had created the exact approval pathway that the Fontaine advisory contracts had subsequently used. The same framework that had allowed $41 million to move through the company without triggering the board sign-off thresholds. It had been created 8 months ago, through a committee meeting convened without Isabella's knowledge. She was not on the governance committee, which she had never questioned because it had always seemed like a structural appropriateness, the CEO equivalent and the oversight structure remaining formally separate. And it had been created specifically, she now understood, to make room for what was already being planned. Sylvia Park had built the door that they had walked through. Isabella stood in the records room with the file open in her hands and understood that she had been outmaneuvered. Not just Damien, all of them, together, operating as a coordinated unit while she had been running the company and negotiating contracts in Zurich, and growing a human being inside her body and believing, with the particular tragic optimism of a competent person who has always done the right thing, that the structures she had built would hold. They had spent 14 months dismantling those structures from the inside. She photographed every page of the meeting minutes with her phone. She replaced the file exactly as she had found it. She reset the cabinet, relocked it, walked back through the dark floor, took the elevator down to the lobby. Outside it was colder now. She stood on the sidewalk and let the cold hit her face and tried to count what she still had. Patricia. She was certain of Patricia, but had nothing to gain from any of this and decades of professional reputation to lose, and Isabella had known her for 8 years and knew the difference between a lawyer who was on your side and one who was performing it. Marco. She was almost certain of Marco. Almost. She hated the almost. She had trusted him entirely 24 hours ago, and in the past 24 hours she had learned what trusting entirely could cost you. Her legal authority under Enzo's Section 14 agreements. That was still hers. The governance committee couldn't touch it. It was embedded in the founding documents of the company's ownership structure, not in the governance framework Sylvia had compromised. Patricia had confirmed that. The video on her phone, the financial records on her personal server. And Patricia had said, tonight before all of this, that she was preparing the Section 14 documentation framework, which meant the documentation was in motion, which meant her phone buzzed. Patricia. She answered it before it had finished buzzing. "I found something," Patricia said. Her voice was different, compressed, the way voices get when the person speaking is choosing every word with extreme care. "I found something and I need you to hear it before you do anything else." Isabella gripped the phone. Tell me. Sylvia Park. I pulled her financial disclosures, the ones she files annually with the Bar Association. There's a consulting income disclosure from 14 months ago, a single payment from a private trust. Whose trust? A pause that lasted 3 full seconds. Enzo Moretti's estate, Patricia said. Isabella heard the words. She processed them. She stood on the sidewalk in the cold air of a New York October and felt something shift deep in the ground underneath everything she had believed. Say that again, she said. Sylvia Park received a payment from the Moretti Family Estate Trust 14 months ago, classified as consulting income. I don't know yet what the payment was for. 14 months ago, when Enzo died, when his estate was being structured and distributed, when someone, in that window between a patriarch's death and the full settlement of his affairs, would have had the opportunity to adjust things, quietly, before anyone was watching. Isabella thought about the letter Enzo had never sent her, the conversation they had never finished, the afternoon in the boardroom when he had given her the code and the authority and the roadmap and said, "There will be a day." She thought about whether Enzo Moretti could have been manipulated in the final months of his life by the people closest to him, by his son, by the attorneys and advisors who structured his estate, by a governance committee chair who had apparently been on the payroll since before he was even in the ground. She thought about whether the safeguards she had believed were hers were actually hers at all. "Patricia," she said. Her voice did something she had not given it permission to do. It went thin at the edges, not breaking, not yet, but thinning, the way a wire goes just before it snaps. Is Section 14 still enforceable? With Sylvia compromised, is the mechanism still valid? A silence she would remember for the rest of her life. "I don't know yet," Patricia said. Isabella closed her eyes. The cold pressed against her face. "I'm going to need 24 hours, Patricia said quickly. The ownership structure is separate from the governance framework. Enzo built them in separate legal instruments specifically, so they couldn't be touched at the same time. But I need to verify that the estate settlement didn't include any modifications to the— How long? 24 hours. Maybe less. Isabella, listen to me. Don't go home tonight. Don't see Damien. Don't speak to Marcus. Don't do anything that moves the situation until I call you." Isabella opened her eyes. The city was in front of her, as always. Burning through the night, as always. Enormous and indifferent and completely unconcerned with any particular story unfolding at street level. "I know where the files are," she said. "The governance records? I photographed everything." "Good. Send them to me right now and then delete them off your phone." "Patricia." She stopped. "What?" She was thinking about Elena, about the small, consistent movement she had felt last night in the dark of the guest room, about what it meant to be bringing a person into a situation that was collapsing faster than she had planned for. "What if they already know I've been looking?" she said. A very short pause. "Then we're out of time," Patricia said, "and we move tomorrow, not Wednesday. Can you be ready by tomorrow morning?" "I have been ready since you called me at 4 in the morning 3 days ago," Patricia said. "Send me the photos." Isabella sent them. Then she deleted them from her phone, as instructed, watching each image disappear from her camera roll with a steadiness that surprised her. She was dismantling her own evidence. She was trusting that Patricia had it on the other end. She was operating now entirely on the faith that the people she had chosen to trust were actually trustworthy. One of the people she had chosen to trust, Sylvia Park, the governance chair, the woman she had been to lunch with 12 times a year for 5 years, had taken a payment from the estate of Enzo Moretti in the same month that Enzo had died, and had then, 6 months later, quietly created the approval pathway that had funneled $61 million out of Moretti Group into the pockets of Damien's mistress and his cousin. She stood on the sidewalk and breathed cold air and thought about the woman she had been 72 hours ago, walking through that lobby with her heels in her hand, so tired she could barely see straight, thinking about the shower she was going to stand in and the sleep she was finally going to get. That woman had been exhausted, but she had also been, in a way she hadn't known to value at the time, on solid ground. This woman, the one standing on 53rd Street in the October cold with a burner file protocol and $61 million of documented fraud on her personal server and possibly no legal mechanism left to expose any of it, this woman had no ground to speak of, just the cold air and her own breathing and the city going past her on all sides. She thought about what Enzo had said at the wedding. You are the serious one. She thought about what that meant now, stripped of every resource she had planned to use, with 24 hours before Patricia could tell her whether she had any mechanism left at all. And then she thought about what she still had. She had $61 million in documentation. She had a video recorded at 2 in the morning in a hallway. She had 12 years of institutional knowledge about every client, every relationship, every liability, and every vulnerability in the Moretti Group's entire global operation. And she had something none of them had planned for when they built their system around the assumption that she would use the official channels. She didn't need the official channels. She pulled up a contact on her phone, a number she had saved 4 years ago and never used, had hoped never to need. It belonged to a man named Daniel Reeves, who was a special agent in the Financial Crimes Unit of the FBI's New York field office, and who had given her his card after a compliance conference where she had presented Moretti Group's anti-fraud framework to an audience of regulators. And he had come up to her afterward and said, in the plain-spoken way of federal agents who have seen too much corporate theater, "This is the best governance presentation I've heard in 10 years. If you ever need to talk to someone outside the family structure, call me." She had taken the card. She had put the number in her phone. She had hoped never to need it. She looked at the number for a long moment. Around her the city moved and roared and burned through the night, as it always did. Then she pressed call and raised the phone to her ear and waited for it to ring, and understood completely, in the cold clarity of that moment, with no illusions left about what she was doing or what it would cost, that the woman who had walked into that lobby 3 nights ago with her heels in her hand was already gone. The woman who pressed call on that October sidewalk was someone new, someone who had stopped waiting for the official channels to save her and had decided in the cold and the dark to become the channel herself. It rang twice. Reeves. The voice was flat, alert, the voice of someone who answered phones at night without surprise. Special Agent Reeves. My name is Isabella Moretti. We met 4 years ago at the NYU Compliance Conference. You gave me your card. A pause. Not long. I remember you, the Moretti Group presentation. Yes? Mrs. Moretti. His voice shifted, not warmer, but more precise, the way a lens sharpens when you turn the focus ring. What can I do for you? She looked at the street in front of her. A cab went by. A woman walking a dog. Ordinary Tuesday night in Manhattan, the city absolutely unconcerned. I have documented evidence of wire fraud, financial misconduct at the executive level, and what I believe constitutes a coordinated scheme to defraud a privately held company of no less than $61 million over 14 months, she said. I have original documents, wire transfer records, corporate registration filings, and governance records. I'm prepared to provide all of it. Silence. She could hear him breathing, could hear the quality of attention on the other end, the specific stillness of a federal agent processing something real. Are you in a safe location? He said. I'm on the street. I'm fine. Can you come in tomorrow morning? Yes. 8 o'clock, 26 Federal Plaza. Ask for me by name at the desk. Don't bring anything digital. Put everything on a USB drive or print it. Don't discuss this call with anyone connected to the company or the family. Understood. Mrs. Moretti. Another pause. Is this going to be a complicated situation? She almost laughed. She caught it before it got out. Yes, she said. I think it's going to be very complicated. Good, he said. And she heard in that single word the particular grim satisfaction of a man who had spent his career waiting for exactly this kind of call. I'll see you at 8. She hung up. She stood on the sidewalk for another 30 seconds. Then she hailed a cab, not a car service, nothing traceable to her account, and gave an address 3 blocks from her building. She paid cash. She walked the remaining 3 blocks in the cold, her coat pulled around her, her bag against her side, her mind running the sequence of tomorrow with the same clean mechanical focus she had always brought to the impossible problems. She did not go upstairs to the penthouse when she got back. She went to suite 1408. Felix was at the desk. He looked at her when she came in, and his face did the same thing it had done 2 nights ago, the carefully neutral expression of someone exercising professional discretion about something he wasn't going to say. Mrs. Moretti, he said. Same room, If it's available, she said. Of course. She took the key card. She went upstairs. She sat on the edge of the bed and called Patricia and told her about Reeves in 4 sentences and told her to have everything on the personal server organized into a single transferable package by 6 in the morning. Patricia was quiet for a moment. You're bypassing the family council entirely. The family council is compromised. And the federal route, Isabella, that exposes everything. Not just Damien, the whole company. It goes public. I know. The company takes damage from this. Real damage. Stock value, client relationships, regulatory scrutiny for years. I know that too. And you're still... Patricia. She stopped her. $61 million. Fraudulent consulting contracts. A governance chair who was paid from the family estate. My husband sleeping with the woman at the center of it. She paused. What exactly is my alternative? Patricia didn't answer that, because there wasn't an answer. 6 in the morning, she said. I'll have it packaged. Thank you. She hung up. She lay down on top of the covers, still dressed, and stared at the ceiling. Elena moved twice, a rolling motion that Isabella had come to recognize as what happened when she was lying on her back too long. She shifted to her side, pressed her palm flat against her stomach. Almost, she said softly. Almost. She slept 4 hours. When she woke up at 5:43, she lay still for exactly 1 minute, running the day in her head from start to finish. Then she got up, showered, dressed in what she had in the bag she'd brought downstairs 2 nights ago. She had not been back to the penthouse since yesterday morning, had not seen Damien since the eggs in the kitchen, and went to work. By 6:15, she had Patricia's package on a USB drive. By 7, she was in a cab heading downtown. She walked into 26 Federal Plaza at 7:58. Daniel Reeves was not what she'd remembered. Or rather, he was exactly what she'd remembered, but she had remembered him as background, and now he was foreground. He was 50, maybe 52, with gray at the temples and the permanent slight squint of someone who spent too many years in rooms with bad fluorescent lighting. He was wearing a suit that had not been expensive when it was new and was not getting better with age. He stood up when they brought her in and shook her hand with a firm, unremarkable handshake. Mrs. Moretti, thank you for coming. He gestured to the chair across from his desk. Can I get you water? Coffee? Water, thank you. He got it himself from a small table against the wall. He set it in front of her, sat down, folded his hands on the desk, and looked at her with the attentive, unreadable expression of someone who had spent his career listening to people tell him things. Walk me through it from the beginning, he said. Take your time. She did not take her time. She walked him through it in 22 minutes, chronologically, without editorial. Here are the facts, here is the documentation, here is the sequence. She laid the USB drive on his desk halfway through and continued talking. He didn't touch it yet. He listened. He made occasional notes on a yellow legal pad with a pen that had the cap chewed off, which she noticed and filed away as somehow reassuring. When she finished, he picked up the USB drive. He turned it over once in his fingers. The governance committee chair, he said. Sylvia Park, former federal judge. Yes. And you believe she was compensated through the estate to facilitate the framework modification? I believe the evidence suggests it. I don't have direct proof of her intent. He nodded, slow and deliberate. And the Family Council Financial Oversight Chair, Marcus Moretti, you believe he's a beneficial owner of the Luxembourg entity. I have the corporate registration documents showing his name. I have wire transfer records suggesting money moved from Fontaine Advisory through the Cayman entity into Tesano Capital Partners, which lists him as beneficial owner. But you can't prove the connection between the fraud and his direct knowledge. No, that's what I need you to find. He looked at the USB drive again. Then he looked at her. His expression had not changed throughout any of this, had been steady and attentive and completely unreadable in the way of people who have trained themselves not to let what they're thinking show on their face. Mrs. Moretti, he said, I have to ask you something and I need you to answer it honestly. All right. Is any of this about your marriage? She looked at him steadily. I discovered my husband's infidelity 3 days ago. I also discovered, in the same 72 hours, that his affair partner and other members of the family had used the relationship to execute a $61 million fraud scheme. Those two things are connected by circumstance and by the people involved. They are not connected in my motivation." She paused. "The marriage is over regardless. The $61 million is gone regardless. What I'm here about is making sure the people responsible face consequences regardless." He held her gaze for a long moment. Then something in his face shifted. Not a smile, nothing as warm as a smile, but a slight relaxation around the eyes that suggested he had just decided something. "Leave this drive," he said. "I'll have our forensic accountant start today. I'll need you available for follow-up questions, probably within 48 hours. "I'm available." "Don't alert anyone in the family structure or the company. Don't do anything that changes the financial landscape inside the company. No transfers, no contract modifications, nothing that looks like you're moving assets." "Understood." "And Mrs. Moretti," he leaned forward slightly, "if anyone in that organization finds out you've been here before we've had time to build a parallel evidence base, this gets complicated very fast." "I know." "Then go back to work," he said. "Act normal. You're good at it, I'm guessing." "Very," she said. She stood. She shook his hand again. She walked back out through the federal building lobby into the morning light of Lower Manhattan, where the financial district was running at full morning speed, thousands of people moving in all directions with the focused urgency of people who believed they were the most important story happening right now. She walked 2 blocks, stopped at a coffee cart, bought a coffee she didn't need and stood with it in her hands and let herself feel, just for 30 seconds, the full terror of what she had just done. The federal route, public exposure, company damage, criminal investigation that would touch not just Damien and Marcus and Camille and Sylvia, but would pull the Moretti name through the system in ways it would not recover from quickly. She had done it anyway. 30 seconds. Then she finished the coffee. Then she walked to the nearest cab. She was back at the Park Avenue office by 9:15, and Damien was waiting in her office. He was sitting in the chair across from her desk, her chair, her office, her space, with his jacket on and his legs crossed and his phone in his hand. And when she came through the door, he looked up at her with an expression she had not seen from him in years. Not anger, not guilt. Something more dangerous than either, calculation. "Where were you this morning?" he said. She set her bag down on the credenza. She took off her coat. She hung it on the hook behind the door with the same deliberateness she brought to everything. "Downtown," she said, "meeting with the compliance team's legal liaison about the Antwerp audit." She moved around the desk and sat down. "Is there something you needed?" He watched her sit, watched her open her laptop, watched her do all of it with the unhurried efficiency she had always had, and that had, she thought, probably driven him a little crazy for years. "Marcus called me this morning," he said. She kept her eyes on her screen. "What did he want?" "He said you've been pulling governance records." The records room, last night, her keycard access, logged automatically by the building security system, which she had known and had decided to accept as a risk. She had moved too fast. Or she had moved exactly fast enough, and Marcus had a direct line into building security that she hadn't known about. She kept her expression exactly where it was. "I was reviewing the Q3 governance documentation for Thursday's agenda item," she said. "Standard preparation. At 8 o'clock at night. I work late, Damien, you know that." He uncrossed his legs. He put his phone in his jacket pocket. He stood up, which changed the geometry of the room. She was seated, he was standing, and he was doing it deliberately, using the height the way men do when they want to remind you of the difference. She did not stand up. She looked at him from her chair with the steady attention of someone who was not going to be managed by staging. "What is Thursday's agenda item?" he said. "Governance review." "What specifically?" "Consulting framework oversight. Marcus knows this. I told him yesterday. He's concerned about the scope. Then he can attend the meeting and find out the scope." She looked back at her screen. "Was there something else?" He put both hands flat on her desk and leaned in. Not threatening, or rather, trying not to be threatening while doing something that was structurally threatening, which was somehow more unsettling than if he'd just been openly hostile. "Isabella." His voice had dropped. Low and serious, the voice he used when he wanted her to understand that the conversation was now happening on a different level. "What are you doing?" She looked up at him from 12 inches away. She could see the tension in his jaw. the slight dilation of his pupils. He was afraid. Under the calculation and the staging and the hands flat on the desk, Damien Moretti was afraid, which meant that Marcus had told him more than he'd let on, which meant Marcus knew more than she had accounted for. "I'm doing my job," she said. "The same job I've been doing for 12 years. The same job that paid for this office and that building upstairs and every contract you've signed your name to since your father handed you the title." She paused. "Is there something specific you'd like to discuss?" The hands came off the desk. He straightened up. Something moved through his face, a wave of something that was not quite shame and not quite fury, but contained elements of both. And then it was gone, replaced by the smooth, authoritative surface that had always been his most reliable tool. "Thursday's meeting," he said. "I'll be there." "Of course you will," she said. "It's a full council meeting." He walked to the door. He stopped with his hand on the frame, the same posture from the kitchen 2 mornings ago, same position, same pause. And she braced herself for nothing, never mind again. Instead, he said, "I saw the keycard log. You were there for 40 minutes. "I'm thorough," she said. He left. She sat very still for 5 seconds. Then she picked up her phone under the desk, below the desk line, below any possible sight line from the glass walls, and texted Reeves with a burner app she had downloaded at 5 that morning on a cheap prepaid phone she had bought at a drugstore on her way to Federal Plaza. "Timeline may be compromised. They know I accessed governance records." His response came back in 4 minutes. "How much do they know?" "Unknown. They know I pulled records, not what I found or where I went this morning. Can you hold until Friday?" She thought about Damien's hands on her desk. About Marcus calling him at 7 in the morning? 8? About the speed with which the information about her keycard access had traveled from building security to Marcus to Damien inside what must have been hours. They had a faster internal communication network than she had planned for, which meant they had been more organized, more coordinated than she had given them credit for. "I don't know," she typed. "What do you need from me to accelerate?" "One more thing. Can you get me the signatory on the consulting framework modification? The actual wet signature document, not the minutes." She thought about the records room, the filing cabinet, the secondary authorization code. She thought about going back in there tonight. She thought about the keycard log that Marcus was apparently monitoring in near real time. "I can get it," she typed. "But not from the building." She thought for 3 more seconds. "I know where the physical backup copies are kept." The physical backup copies of all governance documents were maintained off-site at a document management facility in Long Island City. Standard corporate practice for disaster recovery. She had set up the protocol herself 4 years ago after a server outage had temporarily compromised access to 3 years of executive records. She had chosen the facility. She had established the access credentials. She was, as far as she knew, the only person in the company who had ever set foot there. "Address?" Reeves typed back. She sent it. "I'll have someone there in 2 hours," he said. "Don't go yourself." "Understood." She put the phone back in her bag. She looked at her computer screen. She had 17 new emails, 2 calendar invitations, and a message from Marco asking if she needed anything before his afternoon meeting. She typed back to Marco, "Come see me at noon. Bring coffee." Then she spent the next 3 hours doing her actual job: calls, emails, the Antwerp logistics review, a video conference with the Hamburg office that required her to sit in front of her screen and look completely normal for 45 minutes while discussing cargo routing with 3 men who had no idea that the legal foundation of their employer was being quietly handed to a federal financial crimes unit 11 miles south of where they were sitting. She was very good at looking completely normal. At 11:47, her office door opened without a knock. It was not Marco. It was Camille Fontaine. Isabella had not seen her since the hallway, since the video, since the moment at 2 in the morning that had started everything. She had seen her face, obviously, had looked at it in the dim light of the bedroom, had looked at it in her mind 100 times in the days since. But this was the first time she had seen her in person, in daylight, standing in the doorway of Isabella's own office. She was wearing a cream blazer. Her dark hair was down. She looked, Isabella thought, with the particular cold clarity of a person who has processed their emotional response to a situation in advance and is now operating in execution mode, like someone who had decided to make a move before their window closed. "Close the door," Isabella said. Camille closed it. She stayed standing near it. Isabella, sit down. A beat. Something moved through Camille's expression, surprise at the tone, recalibration. She sat. Isabella looked at her across the desk. She did not perform anything. Did not perform anger. Did not perform dignity. Did not perform the wronged wife or the composed executive. She just looked at her with the same steady attention she had used on Reeves, on Damien, on everyone in the past 72 hours. "Why are you here?" Isabella said. "I wanted to—" Camille stopped, started again. "I think we need to talk." "About what?" "About the situation." Her voice was careful. The voice of someone who has rehearsed and is finding that the rehearsal doesn't quite cover what the room actually feels like. "About Damien. About—" She looked at her hands. "About how this doesn't have to be—" "Camille." Isabella's voice was not loud. It was not sharp. It was simply direct, the way a blade is direct. Not dramatic, just precise. "Do you understand what I know about Fontaine Advisory?" The room went very still. Camille's face changed. The prepared quality went out of it, the rehearsed tone, the careful framing, and what replaced it was something rawer. Something that looked almost like relief, which was the most surprising thing, and then immediately after the relief, fear. She stopped. "I have the registration docs," Isabella said. "I have the 4 consulting contracts. I have the wire transfer records. I have the corporate structure mapping to the Cayman entity." She paused. "I have everything, Camille. So before you decide what this conversation is going to be, I want you to understand what you're sitting across from." Camille was completely still. Her hands, which had been resting on her knees, had gone white at the knuckles. "Who else knows?" she said. "That's not a question you're in a position to ask." "Isabella." Her voice cracked at the edge of the word. "Stand. I didn't plan this from the beginning. The relationship with Damien that started before. I don't care about the relationship." Silence. "I care about the $41 million, Isabella said. "And I care about the fact that you used my company, which I built, to do it." Camille's chin lifted slightly. Something changed in her face again. The fear didn't go away, but something harder came up alongside it. "Your company," she said, and there was an edge in it that Isabella had not expected. "You mean Damien's company?" "No," Isabella said. "I mean mine." They looked at each other across the desk. "Does Damien know you're here?" Isabella said. "No." "Does Marcus?" A flicker. "No." So she had come alone, uncoordinated with the others, which meant either she was more independent than the arrangement suggested, or she was scared enough that she had broken from the group, or— "You're not here to negotiate," Isabella said, reading it suddenly. "You're here because you want out." Camille's jaw tightened. Her eyes went bright in the way that eyes go when a person is concentrating very hard on not showing what they're feeling. "The lawyers are getting close," she said quietly. "Not yours. Someone else's. There's a review being requested through a channel I didn't know about, and it's coming faster than—" She stopped. Isabella went completely still inside. "What channel?" she said. "I don't know exactly. Marcus got a call this morning, a regulatory inquiry. Somebody made an inquiry through the FINRA reporting system about the consulting framework modification. Anonymous tip. FINRA, not the FBI. A parallel inquiry, coming from a different direction. Either a second person had made a move independently, or Sylvia Park, who had taken money from the estate and built the framework, had decided to minimize her own exposure before everything collapsed. The ground was moving under everyone's feet simultaneously. Isabella understood that now. She had made her move. Reeves was moving. Someone else, Sylvia, possibly, was moving through a different channel. And Marcus and Damien were aware enough that something was coming to start getting scared. And Camille Fontaine had walked into her office alone because she was the youngest and probably the least experienced. And she had looked at the walls closing in and made the decision, independently, that the least bad option available to her was the woman sitting across the desk who had every reason to destroy her. "Camille," Isabella said, "listen to me carefully." Camille listened. "I'm going to ask you to do one thing. You're going to think about it, and then you're going to tell me yes or no. If you say yes, I'm going to make one phone call, and you are going to have a conversation with a person I trust. After that conversation, what happens to you depends entirely on how honest you are in it. Camille's throat moved. And if I say no? Then you leave this office, and we never had this conversation, and whatever is coming, comes, and you face it with whatever resources you have, which, based on what you just told me, are diminishing fairly rapidly. A silence that lasted a long time. What's the one thing? Camille said. The signatory on the consulting framework modification, Isabella said. I need the original document with the wet signature, not the minutes, the actual signed approval form. Do you have access to it? Camille looked at her for a long moment. Her face was doing something complicated and private that Isabella didn't try to read. Henri has a copy, she said finally. He kept copies of everything. Isabella reached for her phone. If I do this, Camille said, and her voice had gone very quiet, I need you to know. I need you to understand that what happened with Damien. I don't want to hear about Damien, Isabella said. I know, but I want you to know that it wasn't a strategy. It wasn't part of... She stopped again. It was real. For me. I know that doesn't matter. I know it doesn't change anything. She looked down at her hands. I wanted you to know it wasn't entirely... Camille. Isabella's voice was not unkind. It was the voice of a woman who had already done her grieving on this particular point and was on the other side of it. It doesn't matter. She picked up the burner phone. She called Reeves. I have a witness, she said when he answered. She has access to the original signed document. She's willing to cooperate. A pause. Voluntary? Yes. Where are you? My office, Park Avenue. I'll send someone in 30 minutes. Can you keep her there? She looked at Camille across the desk. Camille was looking back at her with the expression of someone who has jumped off a ledge and is currently in the air, not yet sure what the landing is going to feel like. Yes, Isabella said. She'll be here. She hung up. She set the phone down on the desk between them. 30 minutes, she said. Camille nodded. She put her hands in her lap. She looked out the window, at the city, at the gray October sky above it, at the nothing in particular that people look at when they're sitting with a decision they've already made and are waiting to find out what it costs. Isabella opened her laptop. She went back to the Antwerp review, the Hamburg call notes, the Seoul rescheduling. She kept working because the work was still here and the company was still operating, and 43 ships were currently in transit across 7 ocean routes, and none of those ships cared about what was happening in this office right now. The 30 minutes passed. The knock on her door came at 12:19. 2 people, a man and a woman, both in the particular nondescript professional dress that federal agents apparently issued to everyone, stood in her doorway. The woman looked at Isabella. Isabella nodded toward Camille. Camille stood up. She picked up her bag. She straightened her blazer, the cream one, still perfect, because she was the kind of person who kept their clothes perfect, even when their life was dissolving around them, and Isabella understood that, because she was too. At the door she stopped. She looked back at Isabella. The baby, she said. Is it? She's fine, Isabella said. Something crossed Camille's face. She nodded once. Then she walked out with the 2 agents, and the door closed, and Isabella was alone in her office. She sat for a moment. Then her office door opened again. Not a knock, just opened, and Marcus Moretti came in. Behind him, Damien, both of them in suits, both of them walking with the forward energy of men who have decided the time for subtlety is over. Marcus closed the door. Who were those people? He said. His voice was quiet, but the quiet had iron in it. Isabella looked at him. She looked at Damien behind him. Damien, who was looking at her with an expression she had never seen from him before. Something that had moved past calculation into something rawer and more genuine, which might have mattered to her 3 days ago, and did not matter to her at all right now. Sit down, she said. Isabella? Damien started. I said sit down. Neither of them sat. She opened the drawer of her desk. She took out the folder she had put there this morning, printed copies of the key documents from Patricia's package, the ones she had decided to keep in the office as a contingency. She set it on the desk in front of her. Neither man moved toward it. Fontaine Advisory, LLC, she said. Tassano Capital Partners. 41 million through the first, 20 million through the second. 14 months. 4 fraudulent consulting contracts approved through a governance framework modification that was ratified by a committee chair who received payment from the family estate in the same month Enzo died. The room was very quiet. Marcus's face had gone the particular color that faces go when blood drains quickly from them. Not white, not gray, something in between that has no name because you only see it in specific, terrible moments. Damien had not moved. His eyes were fixed on her, and for the first time since she had known him, since the Maritime Law Conference, since the third date, since the wedding where his father had held her hands, she could not read what was behind them at all. The Federal Financial Crimes Unit has a full evidence package, she said. A cooperative witness is currently providing testimony. The document management facility in Long Island City was accessed by federal agents approximately 2 hours ago. She paused. And the Family Council emergency meeting is scheduled for Friday morning. I've already sent the notice. She had sent it from the building lobby on her way back from Federal Plaza at 9 that morning. 7 messages, 1 to each council member. She had not told Patricia, had not told Marco, had done it alone in the lobby with her coat still on and her coffee in her hand, because it was the one move that couldn't wait and the one move she didn't need anyone else to execute. Marcus opened his mouth. "Don't," she said. He closed it. She looked at Damien. He was looking at her, had been looking at her this whole time, and in the quality of that look was something she hadn't been prepared for, even though she had prepared for everything else. It wasn't the look of a man caught. It wasn't even the look of a man afraid. It was the look of a man who was seeing his wife for the first time, who had been looking at her for 12 years and had somehow, in all that time, failed to see what was actually there and was now, in the worst possible moment, in the worst possible way, finally seeing it. She looked back at him. "Damien," she said. Her voice was completely steady. "If there is anything you want to say to me before Friday, anything honest, you have until tomorrow morning." He didn't say anything. She looked back down at her screen. "Get out of my office," she said. They left. She sat alone. The office was quiet around her. Through the glass walls, she could see her team moving, working, doing the ordinary operations of a company that did not yet know what was coming for it. The city was outside. Manhattan, still burning, still enormous, still completely indifferent. Her phone buzzed. "Reeves. Witnesses cooperative. Document obtained. We're moving to a full preliminary review. Can you be available Friday morning?" She looked at the council meeting notice she had sent that morning. 7 council members. Friday at 9. Moretti Group's formal boardroom on the 41st floor. "I'll be there," she typed, "but I need to be at a family council meeting first." "Can we say 11? 11 works. Mrs. Moretti." She waited. "You're going to want a lawyer present on Friday. Not just for them." She understood what he meant. The investigation would examine everything, including potentially things she had done, the off-site records access, the methods Marco had used to pull financial records that weren't technically available through normal channels. The federal process did not sort neatly into good actors and bad actors at the preliminary stage. It sorted into witnesses and subjects, and the line between them was never as clear as you hoped. "I have one," she typed. She called to Patricia. "Friday," she said when Patricia answered. "The council meeting is Friday morning at 9. Federal interview at 11. I need you at both." A beat. "They're moving faster than we planned. Everyone is moving faster than we planned. Isabella, how are you? I'm fine." She stopped. Looked out through the glass at her team, at the city, at the October sky going gray and heavy above Manhattan. "Patricia, am I going to get through Friday?" A pause. Not long. Patricia was not a person who gave comfort she didn't mean. "Yes," she said, "but it's going to be the hardest day of your life." Isabella thought about the past 4 days, about 72 hours in Zurich, about a pair of shoes outside a bedroom door, about tea in a lobby at 4 in the morning, and eggs in a kitchen, and a cold sidewalk at 8 o'clock at night, and a federal agent's card she had kept for 4 years and never used until now. "It already has been," she said. "No," Patricia said quietly. "Friday will be worse. That's what I need you to understand before we walk into that room. The moment you play that video in front of the council, the moment the fraud documentation goes on the table, there's no going back," Isabella said. "I know, I passed that point 3 days ago." She looked at Elena's latest ultrasound photo on her desk. She had put it there this morning, before everything started. before Damien in her office and Marcus and Camille and Reeves and all the rest of it. She had put it there because she needed something in the room that reminded her why none of the rest of it, not the fear, not the exhaustion, not the scale of what she was about to do, was actually the reason none of it was negotiable. Elena. That was the reason. Not the empire, not the governance agreements, not the $61 million or the Section 14 authority or the 12 years of work that nobody had ever properly credited. Those were the mechanisms. Elena was the reason. And Isabella had known that since 4 in the morning in Suite 1408, sitting with her hands on her stomach in the dark, and she had not stopped knowing it for a single minute since. "Patricia," she said, "I'll see you Friday at 8:30. She hung up. She sat with the ultrasound photo and the city outside and the quiet of her office around her, and she let herself have exactly 60 seconds of being terrified. 60 seconds of understanding the full weight of what Friday was going to be. The council room, the video, the documentation, Damien's face when the lights came up, Marcus's face, the federal interview at 11, the exposure of everything to everyone, the company taking damage it would take years to recover from, her name in the financial press in ways she had never wanted. 60 seconds. Then she closed her laptop, picked up her bag, and went home to the room on the 14th floor to sleep. Friday arrived the way the worst days always do, quietly, ordinarily, with the city doing its usual thing outside the window, as though it hadn't gotten the memo about what was about to happen inside one specific boardroom 41 floors above Park Avenue. Isabella was awake at 4:43. She did not fight it. She lay in the dark for a few minutes, taking inventory the way she always did. Her body, her breathing, the movement of Elena against her ribs, present and steady and entirely unconcerned. Then she got up, she showered, she dressed carefully. Not performatively, not the power suit of a woman trying to look like a weapon, but carefully. The way you dress when you respect the gravity of what you're walking into. Dark charcoal. Clean lines. The pearl earrings that had belonged to her own mother, which she wore when she needed to feel like she was carrying someone with her. She called Patricia at 6. "I'm ready," she said. "The documents are organized," Patricia said. 4 copies. The USB has the financial records and the video file. I've spoken to Reeves. Federal will observe the council meeting remotely if the council consents, which given the nature of the evidence they will. The council members. Did anyone push back on the meeting notice? 2 called to ask what it was about. I told them it was a material governance matter requiring full council presence. Neither pushed further. A pause. "Damien called me last night." Isabella went still. "What did he say?" "He wanted to know if there was any way to handle this privately, to keep it inside the family." "What did you tell him?" "That I don't represent him, and that he should find his own counsel immediately." "Did he say anything else?" A short pause. "He asked if you were all right." Isabella stood at the window of Suite 1408 with the pre-dawn city below her, the lights of Manhattan in the dark, and felt the complicated, unwanted weight of that question from the man who had given her reason to not be all right. She put it exactly where she put everything she couldn't afford right now, in the part of herself she would get back to later, when there was time. "I'll see you at 8:30, she said. She arrived at the Park Avenue building at 8:26. The lobby security guard, not Felix, the day shift, a man named Robert who had worked there 11 years, nodded at her the way he always did. She rode the elevator to 41. The boardroom was at the north end of the floor, a room she had been in hundreds of times, a room she had sat in and presented in and negotiated in and once, 7 years ago, cried in after a particularly brutal regulatory hearing, alone, after everyone else had left. Patricia was already there. She had set up at one end of the long table, documents organized in neat stacks, laptop open, the USB drive sitting in a small plastic case beside it. She looked up when Isabella came in and gave her the particular look of a person who is completely prepared and knows it, and is now watching to see if the other person is too. "You look like yourself," Patricia said. "That's the goal," Isabella said. The council members arrived between 8:45 and 9. 7 people, 6 of them family, by blood or marriage. 1, Sylvia Park, by appointment. They came in twos and singles, filling the chairs around the long table, bringing with them the low-frequency tension of people who have received an emergency meeting notice and have been told nothing about its contents for 72 hours. Marcus came in last, at 8:59, which Isabella clocked as deliberate. He had wanted to see who was already seated before he committed to a chair. He chose the seat at the far end from her. He did not look at her when he sat down. His face was composed. She had to give him that. Damien was not there. She had not put his name on the meeting notice. The council's governing documents were specific. The executive chairman was not a council member. He could attend by invitation. She had not invited him. The empty chair where he might have sat was the loudest thing in the room. At 9 o'clock exactly, Isabella stood up. "Thank you all for coming on short notice," she said. "I'll be direct. This meeting was called under the emergency governance provisions of the Council Charter, Section 9. The subject is documented material financial misconduct at the executive level of Moretti Group. Patricia Osei, who serves as my personal legal counsel and has been appointed documentation officer for this proceeding, will distribute the materials." Patricia began passing the folders around the table. The room was very quiet, the kind of quiet that has weight. "Before you review the documentation," Isabella said, "I want to show you something." She picked up the USB drive. She walked to the head of the room where the presentation system was. She plugged it in. She opened the video file. She had watched it 7 times since recording it. Once in Suite 1408 the morning after. 3 times while preparing documentation. Once with Patricia. Once with Reeves. Once, very late on Thursday night, alone in the 14th floor room, because she had needed to watch it one more time and feel everything it made her feel and then put it away permanently as a source of pain and keep it only as a fact. She pressed play. The room watched. 47 seconds of pale city light coming through floor-to-ceiling windows, falling across a king-size bed, 2 bodies. The sound of the building at 2 in the morning. The slight movement of Damien's arm in his sleep, settling closer to the woman beside him. 47 seconds. She stopped it. Not a single person at that table had made a sound. "The woman in that recording is Camille Fontaine," Isabella said. "Damien's executive assistant and for the past 14 months the principal officer of Fontaine Advisory LLC, through which $41 million in fraudulent consulting fees were paid out of Moretti Group over 4 consecutive quarters." She paused. "The documentation in front of you shows the corporate structure, the contract records, the wire transfers, and the governance framework modification that made the payment pathway possible." Another pause. "Turn to tab 3. Pages turned. She watched their faces as they found tab 3. The Luxembourg registration documents for Tessano Capital Partners, listing Marcus Moretti as beneficial owner. Marcus, at the far end of the table, did not turn to tab 3. He was looking at Isabella with the careful, contained expression of a man who has been waiting for a blow to land and is now experiencing the specific quality of finally receiving it. Not surprised, because he'd seen it coming, but something older than surprise. Something that looked, stripped of all the composure, like exhaustion. "Tab 5, Isabella said. "The Governance Committee minutes from 14 months ago, ratifying the consulting framework modification, convened by Sylvia Park." She did not look at Sylvia when she said it. She kept her eyes on the room as a whole. "I have also provided the Council with evidence that the Governance Committee Chair received a payment classified as consulting income from the Moretti Family Estate Trust in the same month these events began. I am not characterizing the nature of that payment beyond what the documentation shows. That determination belongs to the Council, and where appropriate, to the relevant authorities." Now she looked at Sylvia. Sylvia Park was 61 years old. She had been a federal judge. She had presided over cases that had broken other people in the viewing and had come through them with her face in the same configuration it was always in, steady, contained, slightly formal. She was in that configuration now, but there was something underneath the configuration that Isabella had never seen in her before. Not guilt, not fear, not quite either of those. Something more complicated. Something that looked almost like grief. "I'd like to say something," Sylvia said. Isabella looked at her for a moment. "The floor is yours." Sylvia placed her hands flat on the table in front of her. She looked down at them for a moment, at the documents, at the papers, and then she looked up at the room. "The payment from the estate," she said, "was structured by the estate attorney as compensation for advisory services rendered to Enzo Moretti in the final 18 months of his life. Services related to long-term governance planning." She paused. "I advised Enzo on the Section 14 authority structure, on the separation of the ownership agreements from the governance framework. on the placement of emergency oversight authority in a person he trusted. Her eyes moved to Isabella. He paid me for that work through the estate at his explicit instruction. The framework modification that was subsequently approved by my committee, I was informed it was routine housekeeping consistent with those same governance objectives. I was not informed of its actual application. The room was completely silent. I was used, Sylvia said, not as an excuse, as a fact, stated with the flat precision of a former judge who had spent decades distinguishing between those two things. I was used by people who understood the framework I'd helped build and exploited it. That is my failure. I will accept whatever consequence the council determines is appropriate. Isabella looked at her for a long moment. She believed her. She had not expected to believe her. Had not, at 2 a.m. on Wednesday, believed her. But sitting in this room, watching Sylvia Parks say those words with that face and that configuration, she believed her. And believing her complicated things in the way that truth always complicated things, by removing the cleanness of it, the simple moral geometry, and replacing it with the messier reality of a human being who had been manipulated by people more ruthless than she had known to guard against. "Thank you, Sylvia," Isabella said. She said it simply. Not warmly, not coldly, simply. She looked back at the room. The council's task this morning is to exercise the emergency authority under Section 9 and vote on 2 questions. First, whether the documented evidence constitutes material financial misconduct at the executive level sufficient to trigger review authority under Section 14. Second, if yes, who assumes interim executive authority pending the outcome of the formal review. She sat down. Patricia distributed the formal voting documents. Marcus spoke then, the first time since the meeting began. His voice was quiet and completely level, which she thought later took a certain kind of courage, whatever else she might say about him. "I want to state for the record," he said, "that I retain legal counsel and will not be making substantive comments on the financial documentation at this time." Isabella nodded. "Noted. I also want to state—" He stopped. He looked at her across the long length of the table. "I want to state that what was done to this company was wrong, and that the person most responsible for that is me." Nobody spoke. "Not Damien," Marcus said. "He's weak. He's always been weak. Enzo knew it, we all knew it. But weak isn't the same as corrupt. What was built through Fontaine Advisory was my design. Camille." He stopped again. Something moved through his face. "Camille was involved because I brought her in. The relationship with Damien was incidental, or it started as incidental." He looked down at his hands. "I don't know anymore what was incidental." Isabella looked at him across the table. She thought about the night she had stood in the records room on the 32nd floor and found Tesano Capital Partners. She thought about how she had felt in that moment, the particular quality of the ground dropping away. She understood, sitting here now, that Marcus had spent 14 months building something he thought was invisible, had thought himself smarter than the architecture around him, and had turned out to be sitting inside a structure that Enzo Moretti had built specifically to catch exactly this kind of person. Enzo had known. Not about Marcus specifically, perhaps, but about the category. About what power does to people who aren't strong enough to hold it without grasping. The vote took 11 minutes, 6 in favor of triggering Section 14, 1 abstention, Sylvia, who recused herself on grounds of conflict, 0 against. The second vote, interim executive authority, took 4 minutes, 6 in favor of Isabella Moretti as interim executive chairman of Moretti Group, pending formal review, 0 against. 1 abstention, same grounds. Patricia noted both votes in the formal record. She signed it. She passed it around the table for counter-signatures. It came back to Isabella last. She signed it with the pen she always used for significant documents, a plain black Pilot, nothing special, the kind you could buy at any drugstore, and set it down on the table in front of her. The meeting adjourned at 10:41. People filed out. Some stopped to speak quietly to Isabella. Condolences, words of support, the particular awkward sincerity of people who understand that they are in the presence of a situation that is too large for the usual social vocabulary. She received each of them with the same composure she had maintained for the past hour, which was not performed composure, but real composure. The composure of a person who has passed through the worst part of something and is now in the part that comes after, which is quieter but not easier. Marcus left without speaking to her. He walked out with his jacket buttoned and his hands in his pockets and the particular posture of a man carrying something very heavy, which he would be carrying for a long time. Sylvia was last. She stopped beside Isabella's chair. "He chose well," Sylvia said. "Enzo. He chose correctly." Isabella looked up at her. "I know you believe that now," she said. "I'm not sure it changes what happened." "No," Sylvia said. "It doesn't." She picked up her copy of the meeting documents. "I'll be submitting my resignation from the governance committee by end of day. For what it's worth. I am sorry, Isabella. For my part in it. The size of my part." Isabella held her gaze. "I know," she said. Sylvia left. Patricia was packing up the materials at the far end of the table. The boardroom was empty now except for the two of them, the long table between them, the city visible through the windows in all directions. A gray October Friday in Manhattan, ordinary and unremarkable, completely unaware that something had just ended in this room and something else had just started. "Reeves is expecting you at 11, Patricia said. "I know. Are you ready?" Isabella looked at the signed voting document in front of her. She looked at the empty chairs around the table. She looked at the city outside. "Yes," she said. The federal interview lasted 2 hours and 40 minutes. She sat across from Reeves and a second agent she hadn't met before, a woman named Torres, sharp and thorough, who asked the questions Reeves had clearly designated as the ones he thought would benefit from a different voice in the room. Isabella answered everything, directly, completely, with the same economy and precision she brought to every difficult conversation. Patricia sat beside her and intervened twice, once to clarify the scope of a question about the off-site records access, once to request a 5-minute break when Isabella went briefly, noticeably pale around the 40-minute mark. The break lasted 7 minutes. Isabella drank water. She ate 2 crackers from the package Patricia produced from her briefcase. She put her hand on her stomach and felt Elena moving, a long, slow roll that had become familiar in the past weeks. The particular movement she associated with afternoons, with Isabella sitting down after a long stretch of standing. "Okay," she said. They went back in. At 1:53, Reeves said, "I think we have what we need for today. We'll be in touch about the formal documentation process." "Mrs. Moretti." He looked at her across the table with the same steady, unreadable attention he had brought to everything. "You understand that this investigation will take time. Months, likely. Possibly longer. And during that time, the company will be under a level of scrutiny that—" "I understand," she said. "I've been managing regulatory scrutiny for 12 years. I know what it looks like." He almost smiled. The same almost smile she had gotten from him the first morning, the slight relaxation around the eyes. "I expect you do," he said. "Thank you for your cooperation." She stood. She shook his hand. She shook Torres's hand. She walked out of 26 Federal Plaza into the afternoon light, brighter now, the gray having lifted, the October sky showing blue at its edges, and stopped on the steps for a moment to breathe. Patricia came out behind her. "It's done," Patricia said. "The beginning of it is done," Isabella said. "Yes." A pause. "The beginning of it is done." They stood together on the steps. Neither of them spoke for a moment, which was unusual for Patricia and which Isabella recognized as its own form of acknowledgement, that some things require a moment of silence, even from people who are constitutionally oriented toward action. "What do you need right now?" Patricia said. Isabella thought about it honestly. Not the answer she was supposed to give, not the answer of a person performing strength, but the actual answer. "Food," she said. "Real food. Not a banana." Patricia made a sound that was as close to a laugh as she usually got. "I know a place 2 blocks from here." They walked 2 blocks. They sat in a small Italian restaurant. Not elegant, not expensive, the kind of place with paper placemats and a bread basket that arrived before you'd even looked at the menu. And Isabella ate an actual meal for the first time since the eggs in the kitchen 4 days ago. Pasta, bread, more water than she had drunk in a week. Patricia had a glass of wine. Isabella had sparkling water with lemon. They talked about procedural things, the timeline of the federal investigation, the governance review process, the immediate operational steps Isabella would need to take as interim executive chairman in the coming week, necessary, practical things, the architecture of what comes after. Halfway through the meal, Patricia put down her fork. "There's something I need to tell you," she said. "I've been holding it because the timing wasn't right, and because I didn't know how you'd receive it during everything else." Isabella set down her own fork. "Tell me." "Enzo left you a letter," Patricia said. "It was part of his estate documents. Addressed to you specifically, sealed, to be delivered at my discretion, his words, at the appropriate time." She reached into her briefcase and took out an envelope. Cream-colored, small, handwritten name on the front in the large, slightly unsteady script of a man who had been ill when he wrote it. Isabella. She looked at it for a moment without touching it. "He gave it to me 14 months ago," Patricia said. 3 weeks before he died. He told me you would know when to open it. He told me—" She paused, choosing words carefully. "He told me that you would earn it, that the letter was for the woman on the other side of the hardest thing, not the woman on this side of it." Isabella picked up the envelope. It was light. Not much inside, a page, maybe 2. She opened it. The handwriting was his. She had seen it on documents for 12 years, had seen it on the birthday card he sent every year without fail to the exact date, had seen it on the note he'd left on her desk the last time she'd seen him in person, 3 weeks before he died, which had said only, "Good work on the Hamburg deal." E. This was longer than that. She read it. She read it once quickly, and then she read it again slowly, and the restaurant around her, the noise of it, the other tables, Patricia across from her, went somewhere distant while she read. He had written it in the plain, unhurried way of a man who had said everything elaborate he was going to say in his life, and had arrived, at the end of it, at the preference for plain. He told her what she already suspected, that he had known about Damien's limitations from the beginning, had known the kind of man his son was, and had loved him anyway, with the unsentimental love of a father who has reconciled himself to his child's nature. He told her that he had spent 15 years trying to build around those limitations, with advisors, with structures, with oversight mechanisms, and that none of it had satisfied him until he met her. He told her that he had asked Sylvia Park to build the Section 14 structure specifically with Isabella in mind as the person who would one day use it, that he had embedded her authority in the ownership documents at the founding level precisely because he had known, with the clarity that dying men sometimes develop, that the day would come when Damien's weaknesses would collide with someone else's ruthlessness, and the empire would need the serious one to still be standing. He told her that he was sorry he wouldn't be there, that this was his one significant regret. And then, in the last paragraph, in writing that was slightly more unsteady than the rest, suggesting it had been written last, he told her something she had not known. He told her that the night before he died, he had changed one document in his estate. Not a financial document, not a governance document, a personal one. He had amended his private correspondence records to include a formal written acknowledgement, witnessed, notarized, already on file with the estate, that Isabella Moretti, born Isabella Conti of Genoa, was the true architect of Moretti Group's modern operational structure, the builder of its governance framework, and in all meaningful senses the person who had made the empire what it was. Not Damien, not himself. Her. He had put it in writing, had made it part of the permanent record, had done it quietly, alone, in the last night of his life. "You will not need this document to do what you're going to do," he had written. "But I wanted you to have it anyway. I wanted it to exist somewhere. A thing does not stop being true because no one has written it down. But it is better when someone has." She set the letter down on the table. She looked at it for a moment, then she folded it carefully and put it back in the envelope. Patricia was watching her. She didn't ask what it said. "Thank you," Isabella said, "for holding it." "Of course," Patricia said. They finished the meal. She called Damien that evening from the 14th floor room. She had not been back to the penthouse. She did not intend to go back to the penthouse. He answered on the first ring, which told her he had been waiting for the call, which she had known he would be. "Isabella." His voice was something she hadn't heard from him in a long time. Something stripped of the performance, the authority, the smooth confidence. Just his voice. Just a man on a phone. "The council voted this morning," she said. "Section 14 was triggered. I've been named interim executive chairman pending review. You'll receive formal notification from Patricia's office by end of day." A long silence. "I know," he said. Marcus called. "All right." Another silence. She could hear him breathing. She sat on the edge of the bed in the 14th floor room and looked at the window and waited. "Isabella," he said, "I need to—" He stopped, started again. "I don't know how to—" Stopped again. She waited. "I'm sorry," he said finally. The two words came out stripped of everything. No qualifier, no explanation attached, no sentence structure built around them to soften the landing or redirect the impact. Just the words. She held the phone and let them exist for a moment. "I know you are," she said. "That's not enough." "No," she said. "It's not." Silence. "The baby," he said. "She's fine." "Isabella—" His voice went thin at the edge, the way hers had gone thin on the phone with Patricia several nights ago. She recognized it. She had her own version of it. I don't know what I'm asking. I don't have the right to ask anything." "No," she said. "You don't." "Will you—" He stopped himself. She could hear him doing it, the physical effort of stopping himself from asking the thing he didn't have the right to ask. She thought about 12 years, about a maritime law conference and third dates and a wedding where his father held her hands. About the way he had looked at her this morning in the boardroom before the meeting started, through the glass. She had seen him standing in the hallway outside, had seen him understand that he wasn't going to be let in, had watched his face do something with that information that she was not going to think about right now, or possibly ever. "The divorce papers will come through Patricia's office," she said. "Read them carefully this time." She hung up. She sat with the phone in her lap. The room was quiet. Outside Manhattan was beginning its evening, the city shifting registers from the afternoon rush to the night version of itself, a transition she had always liked. The moment when the light changed and the noise changed and everything went slightly more liquid, slightly less directed. Her phone buzzed. "Marco, the Hamburg team is asking about next week's review call. Should I confirm you or hold?" She looked at the text. She thought about the council vote this morning. The signed document. Interim Executive Chairman, Moretti Group, 43 ships in transit. The Antwerp Logistics Review still outstanding. Seoul still needing a rescheduled call. The Asia-Pacific expansion plan sitting in a folder on her personal server, the one she had drafted on a yellow legal pad on a red-eye to Tokyo, which had been waiting 3 years for someone to take it seriously. "Confirm me," she typed back. 9 o'clock Tuesday. She put the phone down. She reached into her bag and took out the envelope with Enzo's letter. She held it for a moment without opening it again. Just held it, felt the slight weight of it, the specific paper texture of something that had been written by a man who was no longer alive but had nonetheless managed to show up, in his way, when it counted. Then she set it on the nightstand. She called the building's permanent concierge line, not Felix's direct line, just the general number, and asked about the process for transferring her reservation to a longer-term furnished accommodation. The 14th floor was not where she was going to live permanently. She knew that. But she was not going back to the penthouse, and she needed somewhere to be while she found the place that came next. The concierge told her there were 2 furnished apartments available in the building for monthly rental. She asked to see both tomorrow morning. She hung up. She lay down on the bed. She put her hands on her stomach in the dark. Or not quite dark. The city coming through the curtains the way it always did up here. The low, warm light of Manhattan at night, which was never quite dark and never quite bright, but something in between that she had lived inside for long enough that it felt like her natural element. Elena moved. The slow afternoon roll, except it was evening now. Apparently Elena didn't have a strict schedule, which Isabella found obscurely comforting. The suggestion of a person already doing things on her own terms. "I know," Isabella said. "I know." She thought about what came next, not strategically, not the federal investigation or the governance review or the executive transition plan, just what came next in the plain sense. Tomorrow she would look at 2 apartments. Tuesday, she would run the Hamburg call. Sometime in the next 2 weeks, she would meet with the full leadership team of Moretti Group for the first time as the person who was actually, officially, formally in charge. Not behind the scenes, not the architect working in the walls, but the person at the head of the table with her name on the door. Sometime in January, if Elena kept to her schedule, there would be a person in the world who had never known any version of Isabella except this one. The one on the other side of the hardest thing, the one who had stood in a hallway at 2 in the morning holding her heels and made the decision, Not the decision to fight, exactly, but the prior decision, the one that made fighting possible. The decision to remain herself, to not dissolve, to take what she had found behind that door and refuse to let it become the defining fact of who she was. That was the decision that had made everything else possible, and it had been made in about 30 seconds in a dark hallway before she even fully understood what she was deciding. She thought about the women who didn't make that decision, the ones for whom the closed door or the open one became the last thing. She understood them. She did not judge them. She had been 30 seconds away from joining them in that hallway before something in her, stubbornness or self-preservation, or the simple arithmetic of Elena's existence, had pulled her forward instead of down. 30 seconds. The city outside was doing what it always did. She closed her eyes. She breathed, in and out, the measured way, the way she had learned during the worst moments of the worst negotiations, when the room was against her and the outcome was uncertain and everything depended on appearing completely calm. She was not performing calm. She was calm. Genuinely, tiredly, all the way down to the bottom of herself calm, with the specific quality of calm that exists on the other side of a long, terrible, necessary thing. She slept. In the morning, she looked at both apartments. The second one, 2 bedrooms, east-facing, a room that got the early light, was the one. She knew it immediately. The way you know. She signed the lease that afternoon. She called a moving company. She arranged to have her personal belongings. Not the furniture, not the art, not any of the things she and Damien had chosen together, only her own things, her books and her clothes and her work materials, and the small collection of objects that were hers in the singular sense, moved from the penthouse to the new apartment by the end of the following week. She contacted a real estate firm, listed the penthouse, she called her doctor, confirmed her next appointment, confirmed the birth plan, confirmed that everything remained on track, that Elena remained exactly where she was supposed to be, growing at exactly the rate she was supposed to grow, completely uninterested in the adult events occurring in the world she was preparing to enter. She went back to work. Not the hidden work, not the work in the walls, the actual work with her name on it, from the chair she had earned in the plainest and most expensive way a person can earn anything, by being the only one left standing after everything else had fallen. 3 months later, on a cold January morning, with snow coming down over Manhattan and the city going quiet the way it only goes quiet when snow falls, Elena Moretti arrived. 7 pounds, 2 ounces, a full head of dark hair, the particular expression of a person who has just completed a significant undertaking and is now taking stock of the new environment. Isabella held her in the delivery room with the snow coming down outside the window and looked at her daughter's face, already specific, already its own, already somehow entirely itself, in the way that newborns sometimes are before the world has had time to suggest to them what they're supposed to be, and felt something she didn't have a word for. Not happiness exactly, though happiness was part of it. Not relief, though relief was in there too. Something more fundamental than either. Something that had to do with the plain fact of continuation, of a line that had not been broken. Patricia was in the waiting room. Marco was in the waiting room, having shown up with flowers, and then apparently panicked about hospital protocol and been unable to leave. Felix, the night concierge, had sent a card that arrived at the hospital before Isabella did, which she didn't know was possible, and which she found so unreasonably moving that she had to set it down and look at the ceiling for a moment. Damien had texted at 7 in the morning. A single message. "I hope you're both okay." She had looked at it for a moment. Then she had set the phone face down on the bedside table and not responded, which was neither cruelty nor performance, but simply the truth of where she was. A woman in a hospital bed waiting for her daughter, with no remaining bandwidth for the management of another person's feelings about the situation he had created. She would respond. Later. She would find over time the particular arrangement that allowed 2 people who had ended badly to exist in the world as the parents of the same child without destroying each other or the child. She had seen other people manage it. She was realistic about how hard it was and realistic about her own capacity to do hard things. But not today. Today was for Elena. She looked at her daughter's face. She thought about the letter in the nightstand of the new apartment. About Enzo's handwriting, slightly unsteady, written in the last night of his life, saying that a thing does not stop being true because no one has written it down, but it is better when someone has. She thought about the document in the estate records, her name, the words he had chosen, the permanent record. She thought about 43 ships in transit and the Antwerp Review and the Asia-Pacific expansion plan and the Tuesday Hamburg call and all the relentless ordinary machinery of the empire she had built and was now running in the plain light where everyone could see her doing it. She thought about a pair of shoes outside a bedroom door, left open just enough. The door that had started everything. She looked at Elena. "Hi," she said. Elena's eyes, dark, unfocused in the way of newborns taking in the light, moved in the direction of her mother's voice. Outside, the snow kept coming down over Manhattan. The city received it the way it received everything, without ceremony, without pause, continuing to be exactly what it was, regardless of whatever was falling on it from above. The lights were on everywhere. The streets were quieter than usual, but not empty. Nothing in this city was ever entirely empty. Isabella held her daughter and let the snow fall and did not think about what came next. Not tonight. Tonight was only this: the weight of a new person in her arms, the smell of her, the absolute present tense fact of her existence. The thing that had been worth it, the thing that had always been worth it before she even knew what it was. She had protected the empire. She had exposed the fraud. She had done the hard and costly and necessary things that had needed doing. But this was the reason. This had always been the reason. The snow fell on Manhattan, and Isabella Moretti held her daughter, and the city burned on through the night, as it always did, indifferent and luminous and completely alive.